Data is there in service of a story. You have to make sure that you're telling a story that is coherent and that is compelling. How do we package it into a story that resonates and ultimately kind of moves people?
I'm Ed Marsh, host of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast. In almost every one of my conversations on the podcast, we stumble across or we end up talking about the subject of data. And that's in conversations with experts in various areas of revenue growth, including disciplines that haven't traditionally been data driven. I mean, you've heard the expression, I know half my marketing dollars are wasted, I just don't know which half. So one of the big goals of the Industrial Growth Institute is to change the mindset that somehow we can approach manufacturing and operations with discipline and rigor and data, but somehow marketing and sales is different. So with that background, I'm super excited today to have somebody who I consider a real data expert joining me. Ben Tagoe is the CEO of Objective Management Group, the leading provider of sales team analyses, salesperson evaluations, and sales candidate assessments. And certainly that is super interesting in and of itself, and we're going to dive into that. But what's also interesting is how he ended up here. He's not a crusty, long-time sales trainer. He's a Princeton grad who then got his Harvard MBA with high distinction after a brief gig in interest rate sales at Goldman Sachs. After Harvard Business School, he was a product manager for a firm that used data modeling to improve the efficiency of small business lending, then a VP of community lending at JP Morgan Chase, followed by time as an SVP of strategic planning at Vantage Score Solutions, a firm that uses data science to improve credit scoring. So there's a very strong data theme here. He's also on the board of Let's Get Ready, a nonprofit that helps students from historically underrepresented backgrounds have the support they need to attain a college education. So I've got a feeling this conversation is going to take us in many different directions, and I can't wait to jump in. But with that, welcome, Ben. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited for this.
Absolutely. All right. I've got an advantage over the listeners. I've heard you speak in the past about your mom, who's a teacher, and I've heard a very kind of genuine, heartfelt set of comments from you that indicate a feeling of social responsibility. So tell us, as a Princeton and HBS grad who could be operating in the rarefied era of investment banking, you've chosen a different path. Take me through your background and give us some context of your background to help understand the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to, and I'll try to be as concise as I can about it. So,
but don't skip any important details. We'll be patient.
Like you kindly mentioned, I graduated from Princeton, and my timing, I was very lucky to go there, but my timing could have been better because I graduated right in the middle of the financial crisis. And you probably don't know this, Ed, but I went to work on Wall Street. I was actually originally meant to go work at a little investment bank that you might have heard of called Lehman Brothers. And unfortunately, by the time I got my diploma, that employment offer had gone up in smoke. Wow. in the bankruptcy. But I was lucky enough to end up at Goldman on the sales and trading floor, selling, as you mentioned, interest rate products and government bonds. It's really the closest thing to a sales job that I've ever had, at least until I later on in my career when I found Objective Management Group. And I say to this day that job on the trading floor is probably the most fun job that I've ever had. It's an incredibly high-paced job. The stakes are high. The stakes are very high in terms of the amount of money that you're moving and that you're putting at risk. And every minute, every aspect of that job is sort of like you're doing like a math pop quiz, right? What's the price of this going to be? How much is it going to move? How do we price it? How do we position it? So it really, for someone whose brain is kind of activated that way, it was very fun. It was very engaging. I struggled a little bit though, because I felt that, and I still have a lot of friends who do this job, and I think it's a very important job. For me, I struggled personally because it didn't pass what I call the Thanksgiving test. Meaning, when I would go home at Thanksgiving and my mother or my grandmother or my uncles would say, you're working so hard. We barely ever see you. Every time we call you, you're at work. What do you do all day? And I would say, well, I trade Canadian inflation derivatives, right? And I could just see their eyes just glaze over. They're like, okay, next, like, pass me some more turkey. It's just there's just sort of this lack of tangibility, lack of relevance to the to
Right.
the work, and it's very important work. But for me personally, like, having that relevance was really really important. Um, so I moved on from there. I, as you mentioned, was lucky enough to get accepted to Harvard for business school, and while I was there, I ended up doing a lot of research with some of my professors and some of my classmates on how technology was or is changing financial services, and how I'd seen a little bit of this at Goldman. How are banks and other financial services firms bringing software into what they do to make their workers more efficient, and also bringing data in to allow them to make better decisions, kind of minimize risk. And that just really captured my imagination, right? Because in my previous job, I had kind of been the machine, right? I was the one
Right.
who was doing the risk analysis and the one who was doing the pricing and everything. And then, and this wasn't that long ago. I mean, this was 12, 13 years ago. It's like, wow, this is the first time that we are actually going to automate this human decision making and really minimize the amount of kind of error or minimize the amount of risk that's involved in it. And I wanted to be a part of that, right, in whatever way I could. So I ended up at this company that had just IPO'd. You'd mentioned it. It's called On Deck Capital. And they were using data. They built these data models to make loans to small businesses almost instantly. We could fund, we had a credit score that would allow us to very accurately decision the risk of a very, different types of small businesses, dentists, laundromats, hardware stores, florists. It didn't matter. We could decision them to a pretty high degree of accuracy, and then that allowed us to provide pretty close to instant funding for like mid six figure amounts. Like, we could send someone $500,000
Wow.
in like 2 days, right, with an instant decision. So that really opened my eyes up to the power of what can you do when you start to just gobble up as much data as you can and use it to train your model. And I think I kind of got a little hooked on the data piece. I said, okay, we've got data, we're doing great stuff, but we found actually, or at least I felt, that we were a little bit limited because we only had a limited set of data, right? We were a medium-sized company, but we were still pretty small, and we were only working in the small business space. And for me, the question I started to ask was, what does this look like when you have a view on data over a pretty large slice of the economy, not just small businesses, but mid-market, enterprise? What happens when you have data on the intermediaries? What happens when you have data on the consumers? And can you like put all of that together in a very holistic picture? So I kind of started asking myself, okay, who's got this data? Who's got this data? And it's like, well, there are 3, 4 banks in the United States that basically have, I forgot the exact number, but let's say 40% market share and a view onto what essentially every single household in the US is doing with their financial
Wow.
information. And on the other side, what every single firm is doing with that data, with those transactions. So I ended up at JP Morgan in a similar role, but with just a much, much wider aperture, because there, instead of working with a few, thousand small businesses a year, we were working with about 2 to 3 million small businesses a year.
Mm-hmm.
About a third of all the there's 6 million employee small businesses that have employees in the US. We worked with about a third of them. And then obviously they work with, something like 40, 45% of US households through some kind of banking or card relationship or whatever. So we were able to take all that information and really start to, what I say about data is the way that it's most useful is in telling interesting stories. And we were able to start telling some really interesting stories around, hey, we are seeing households spending a lot less or spending a lot more, and it's starting to have an impact on this sector of the economy. Or we're seeing extension of credit in this geography, and it's starting to have an impact on business growth or business formation in this part of the country. So that wide aperture was just really, really, really cool. We were able to do some fun stuff with that. And then, like you mentioned, kind of this ongoing pursuit of ever more data, I wanted to just kind of burnish my chops when it came to how do you actually build the models, the understanding the statistical and analytical side a little bit better. So I went to go work at this credit score model development company, Vantage Score, which is the provider of free credit scores in the U.S. If you've ever checked your credit score on any one of the phone apps or any one of the free websites, Vantage Score basically provided all of that. It's the only competitor to FICO in the market. And that's really where I learned, okay, how do we take a credit score model and use it to as a lever in a business, right? And how do you sort of treat risk not as something that's a given, but treat it as almost something that is a variable where you can kind of dial up or dial down to help you solve for other business outcomes that you want, right? I'll take more risk if it means more profitability, or I'll take less risk if it means that I'm going to get more efficiency in some part of my marketing funnel or whatever else. And really sort of was able to, kind of hone my intuition about that. And then at the back of my mind, well, I'll stop there before I go on.
Yeah, what's interesting to me is you came at this as a liberal arts major. I mean, at Princeton, I think you were studying economic development in New Jersey metros. You weren't running math algorithms. You weren't doing statistics. So how did you bridge that? I mean, my sense has always been these kinds of models are so complex. You got to be a complete math wizard.
Yeah, I really thank you for referencing that undergrad degree was economics and public policy. I hope you didn't read the thesis because it's I don't even think. um, but yeah, so how did I come at it as a layperson? I like to tell everyone, I got a C minus. Proud, I earned a C minus in statistics. It was a hard course, made harder by the fact that I wouldn't go to class because it was at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I was a 20-year-old. But how did I come at this from a lay perspective, and sort of how did I build a foundation? In some ways, what I found was coming at it from a lay perspective, like not having a PhD in statistics or a master's in analytics, actually was a little helpful from the commercial side, because I, and I still try to approach this with some humility of like, I don't know this as well as the people that are in the numbers. But what I do know and what I've been able to really build kind of strong foundation in is how do we apply this in a business context, right? So, I would have conversations with, I became friends everywhere I worked. I became friends with the analytics team and the head of data science, like, very, very closely. And we would have conversations where they would say, here's a model, this is what it does. Or I'd ask them, what does this do? What does this input? What happens if we change this, right? So just sort of start from a place of curiosity. And then I would also ask them, okay, what happens if we apply this model in this business context, right? You have a risk model, you have a pre-approval model, essentially is one way you can think about it. You have a pre-approval model that we're going to use as a screen on everybody who we're going to market to, right? So I would run marketing campaigns where we would put out promotional offers or something, but we wanted to make sure that the people who we were marketing to were actually likely to be eligible for the product.
Sure.
So I'd ask a question around, okay, what happens if we change the eligibility criteria by this? Can I get more people who are likely to be approved, fewer people who are likely to be approved? How many of them are going to be on the margin who are going to have to put into some sort of offline workflow that we, figure out? So, just through questions like that, I was able to understand not so much the statistics itself, although over time I did build some understanding of that, but really, how do we take these statistics and translate into something that somebody who doesn't know statistics, me, can still find, and my colleagues can still find, useful and use to make decisions. And really, that's most of us, Ed, right? Like most of us aren't walking around PhDs in statistics or really great intuition about how to take, linear regressions and turn that into odds ratios. But if I told you, hey, I can help you make a decision where the likelihood of you getting a good outcome is 3x as great as it was before, you don't need to know statistics to know, yeah, that seems like something that I should probably investigate further.
Yeah, maybe based on behavioral finance, the way to say it would be the other way around. The likelihood that I can save you a bad decision is 3x what you had before. I mean, Kahneman tells us that people experience the loss of a bad decision far more than they do the joy of a good decision, right?
Totally right. Loss aversion. And it's funny. I'm probably jumping ahead a little bit, but that was actually one of the really key findings is when I found Objective Management Group that drew me to the company is when I in my diligence I talked to VPs of sales, CEOs who are responsible for hiring sales teams, and I said, if you can increase the number of good salespeople who you hire, is that compelling? And they said, that's interesting but not compelling. And then I said, well, if we could decrease the number of bad salespeople who you're hiring,
Mm.
is that compelling? And you could just hear like the emotion in their voice.
Wow.
Anyone who's ever had to terminate a bad hire or whatever, they're like, oh my God, if you could save me the heartache of having to go through that again, I would pay you so much money.
Wow.
And then I said, okay, well, hold that thought.
All right, yeah, we're definitely going to go there, and we're going to talk about the cost of bad hires, and I was going to talk about it in terms of the money, but we'll definitely have to touch on the emotional aspect of it. But before we run there, give us a quick pitch for Let's Get Ready. I mean, why should people listening right now pull out their phones, go to letsgetready.org, and hit the give button?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So Let's Get Ready is this awesome organization that I've actually been a part of since I was a student in college and I was a coach there. Let's Get Ready provides college counseling and SAT tutoring to basically students from under-resourced backgrounds. So primarily for students who are first in their generation to go to college, and these are kids who just themselves have incredible. We talk about commitment and motivation and desire and selling. These are kids who have incredibly high desire, commitment, motivation. They just don't necessarily have the resources or the path that's been laid out for them. So Let's Get Ready has this peer mentorship model where they're paired with college students who have basically just gone through this process themselves, gone through the college admissions process, and they provide them with coaching. They provide them with resources to help them figure out how to take the SATs, navigate financial aid, fill out the FAFSA. And then once they actually get into college, they continue to provide them with mentorship and coaching. Here's how to take advantage of your professor's office hours. Here's how to set up your study schedule so that you don't get a C minus in statistics like I did.
Well, first you go to
and what we
class,
end,
even if it's at 8:30 in the morning.
Go to set your alarm, go to that class. And what we end up seeing is that the enrollment rates for Let's Get Ready students are far higher than comparable enrollment rates, for like 4 times as high. And then once they are enrolled, once they're matriculated, the persistence and the 5-year graduation rates are in some cases even higher than what we see for students that are coming from resource backgrounds, right? If you pair motivation and commitment with the resources, these kids just do incredibly, incredibly well. So I was lucky to be a coach there and get the chance to help a few students, and I've been lucky to be on the board and support it. So I'm a huge fan.
And of course, I hear data, and you talking about the performance of the organization that it has. Speaking of data, for people thinking about donating, do you know off the top of your head the percentage of donations that actually go to support operations?
That's a great question. Ooh, and I should have it off the top of my head. I do not, but come
So
back to me on
is it
that.
fair to say substantial?
It is substantial. Yeah, because it's this peer model, there's very, very low admin overhead because we're not using any administrators or any corporate staff to work with the students. It's all students working with other students. So it's also a very, very efficient model. I don't have the latest stats off the top of my head, but I can get
Got
that
it.
for us.
All right, and then one more background question to give us this foundation as we go forward. Recently, in conversation, you and I ended up talking about West Africa, time that I'd spent there doing business, and some of your family heritage. Fill in those pieces for me.
Yeah, sure. So I'm not sure if there's a tie into data necessarily, but as we talked about, my family is from Ghana in West Africa, Accra, the capital city of Ghana. For the most part, I was actually born in London. For the most part, I grew up here, but I still have a lot of family back there. My grandmother, we're very lucky to have her with us. She's 95 years old and still lives in
Wow.
still lives in Ghana. So we're we're able to get back there and visit her from time to time. My mother was actually just back there right now.
Nice. And your mom is or was a teacher?
She was, yeah. She's retired now, but she was a teacher. She actually taught special ed and kind of occupational skills to students that had disabilities.
Got it. All right, so you had this succession of jobs. You were going deeper into data. You were understanding how to use data to make decisions, make better decisions, make decisions that perhaps would not just be in the best interest of the company making them, but honestly in the best interest of the people who you were making the decisions for. So in other words, a company wasn't going to get overextended and take a loan that wasn't prudent for them because you understood perhaps better than they did the financial situation. So you were building this background, and then during COVID, you took the plunge. You raised a single company fund. You started looking for a company to invest in. What were the criteria? How many companies did you look at? And in the end, why was it OMG?
Oh man, so I'll answer that in a couple of ways or in different order. So I probably looked at close to probably looked at over 5,000 companies over
Wow.
the course of like 14, 15 months. I looked in a couple of industries. The unifying thread, as you can imagine, was I wanted to find a company that had a compelling and a relatively untapped or underutilized data asset
Mm-hmm.
that we could build analytics on top of as part of the product to make the product kind of stickier and more compelling for users. And also, from a marketing perspective, it would allow us to deliver unique insights and have something to say into the market that nobody else was able to talk about. Um,
Okay.
so those are kind of the broad parameters. You could find that in a bunch of different ways. I actually thought about buying a combination, rolling up a bunch of sales training companies, because my thinking was, okay, if you can find companies that have a common curriculum and the trainers have a lot of performance or outcome data, right? That's which is in the model development world is kind of like gold to have
Mm-hmm.
outcome or performance data. You could say something really compelling about what types of curriculum, what types of interventions lead to outcomes for better salespeople. Um, so I started talking to a bunch of sales training companies, and that realized that was probably not going to be a great idea, or I was not going to be the best person to execute that idea. But these guys keep talking about this OMG thing, and finally I said, you know what, I should. I keep hearing about the OMG. I should give this guy Dave a call. So I dropped him an email and got on the phone, and about 20 months later, here we are.
And was Dave thinking about selling, or did you just reach out to him at the right time?
I think I found him at the right time. I'm sure that the thought had crossed his mind. This wasn't, the first. It wasn't the first time he thought about, kind of what comes next. But I think
Sure.
I just managed to catch him at a really good time.
Got it. All right. So let's go deeper into OMG. I introduced it in your bio at the beginning, but really, what does OMG do, and why is it so unique?
Sure. So very simply, we make talent assessments for people who work in sales. Our talent assessments, you can use them to hire and help you identify really good salespeople. You can also use them to essentially as a gap analysis for your existing sales team and figure out where you need to train your team in order to bring them up to elite quality. There are a couple of things that make us unique. First is we're really the only ones that operate in this category, right, of sales talent assessments. There's a broader assessments category of a lot of psychometric and personality and behavioral tests. But when it comes to measuring sales specific skills and scale specific beliefs, we're really the only ones that do that. And the other thing that makes us unique and why I kind of fell in love with the company is we've been doing it for long enough that we have accumulated a pretty substantial amount of data, both on how salespeople and sales teams, companies, excuse me, think about their competencies and report themselves on their competencies. And we also have some interesting performance data in terms of what do companies tell us about sellers' performance, what do salespeople tell us about their own performance, and we're able
There's a
to
difference between those two?
so this is really interesting. There actually is not that big of a difference, Ed.
Well,
We just did some analysis right now. We should actually put it together into a blog post because I thought it was kind of funny, compelling to see. Is So we ask performance a couple of different ways. We ask the company to tell us about the seller's performance, and then we ask the salespeople, tell us about your own performance, and tell us about what your company would say about your performance. And I would have expected that, there would be some drift there. But for the most part, when a company identifies somebody as a top performer, that person also identifies themselves as a top performer. And for the most part, when a company identifies someone as a bottom performer, that person also says, yeah, you know what? I'm not doing too hot right now. So I was actually very surprised by the degree of honesty. The drift was, I don't have the exact number top of my head, but let's say it was like less than like 10% sort of
Really?
deviation, which was quite surprising to me.
I interrupted you though. You're continuing to talk.
Yeah, no. So we've got this data. We've got assessment data. We've got outcome data. So from a modeling perspective, it just lets us do some really cool stuff in terms of calibrating the model and continuing to refine the model to make it more predictive.
Got it. Someone with your background and the board that you've assembled for your company, obviously you don't play small ball. So you've got, I assume, a big vision, obviously about improving sales effectiveness. So there's an enormous TAM, total addressable market. Every company has sales. Every company needs to be more effective at sales. Are you able to share anything about the vision that you and the board have and kind of what's next and where OMG goes? We're going to talk more about what's now and what you do so well, but I'd love to understand more about the potential.
Of course. So I appreciate you asking me. So if we were to kind of put numbers around it, so today, so as you mentioned, or before we start putting numbers on it, as you mentioned that every company has sales, or almost every company has sales. We are applicable across industries. We're a horizontal product. Anyone who's doing a complex B2B sale, where the ACV is, let's say, getting into like five figures, is a good candidate for us. Our narrower ICV might be around the middle market, like 50 to $500 million, but we have applicability all the way up to enterprise, and we've worked with enterprise
And
clients
all the way down to a couple of $1 million companies as well.
all the way down to a couple $1 million companies. Yeah, if you have a seller, or you are the CEO and you're the primary seller yourself, yeah, we can help you. So broad applicability, big TAM, like you mentioned. Today we work with about 2,000 companies every year across the world. We operate in 44 countries. We work with about 2,000 companies. I would like for us, let's say by 2030, to have quintupled that and to be working with closer to 10,000 companies. And that's sort of the tangible goal. Like I said before, there are 6 million employer small businesses in the US. And the majority of those have sales teams and are engaged in a complex B2B sale.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm steering us towards 10,000 right now. That's the BHAG. But the sort of ultimate BHAG is, hey, we should be working with 2.5, 3 million small businesses. We're not going to get there overnight. Let's
Right.
get to 10,000 first. But ultimately, that's where we want to be.
And I've heard you share that you've got a 30-year kind of roadmap. So this is not something you're not trying to scale like a SaaS company for an IPO in the next 3 years. This is something you're committed to personally as Ben Tagoe, and you're really focused on building this the right way.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, huge credit to Dave and the previous owners, because I think they gave the company a really, really solid foundation to be able to scale. So we're lucky that we're in a position where we can continue to scale and grow without having to think about, do we take on outside capital, do
Right.
we need to IPO or whatever else. And the I say it kind of jokingly, but I'm also serious. Is, look, I got the job I want, so the last thing I want to do is put myself out of work. So, and I think I got 30 more years. Maybe we'll see.
All right, so let's dig more specifically into the tools. You mentioned psychometric testing. There's lots of different assessment tools out there. Some are very scientific, some are smoke and mirrors, some are intended for something completely different. They slap a sales label on it. There's personality, there's behavioral, there's IQ tests. How specifically does OMG compare to each of those, or kind of categorically, as a set of tools compared to other options?
Yeah. So how does OMG compare to the other folks in the psychometric space. So the analogy I use is psychometric testing is it's like your toolbox at home. You open up your toolbox and you got a hammer, you got a saw, you got a level, you got a flathead, you got a Phillips, you got a Phillips screwdriver, wrench, you got a bunch of stuff in there, right? Um, all of them can be useful to you, but you've got to make sure that you're pulling out the right tool for the right job.
Okay.
Right. If I'm trying to put some joints together and I take my circular saw to do that, it's not going to work out too well for me. Right. I'm just going to look silly. And and that's what we're trying to help educate the market about. So if I think about the broad categories of psychometric tests, there are personality tests, which are what most folks are most familiar with, which is basically how does this person's personality or kind of inherent disposition, personality type or inherent disposition, impact their interpersonal relationships, personal level, and also we bring it into a professional context and a work level.
Okay.
How am I going to relate to my colleagues knowing that I have higher or lower levels of conscientiousness, that I'm more or less direct, etc. Um, that's a great tool. That's really important to know in understanding how is this person going to work with or play with somebody else. That's not a great tool in understanding, can this person pick up the phone and make 500 outbound calls a day and get the door slammed in their face or get the phone slammed on them and keep going. It's not really a great tool to understand, can this person sell on value and position a product's value as opposed to just immediately having a negotiation around price and usually end up giving the farm away. So what we find is when you use a personality tool to help you evaluate, does this person have specific sales skills and will they be successful in a selling role, you don't get very good outcomes. Like you don't get any outcomes that you can draw any kind of trend line on, which is not surprising because you're using a circular saw to try to put some joints together.
Every time you say that, I'm thinking you've seen some of my finished carpentry.
I haven't. If it's up for sale, man, I'll come out there and take a look. Um, but so our assessment is in the category of what's called a skills assessment, right? Skills assessments, kind of as you would expect, are assessments that measure a specific skill, a specific on the job skill. So you can have skills assessments for things like, is someone a good accountant? Is someone good at computer programming? And sometimes you even see these in like formal licensure, right? Like if you want to show that you are a good accountant, you have the CPA designation, which means that you've taken certain
Right.
accounting skills tests, right, and passed them to a certain degree. So we kind of operate in a similar vein. Ours is a sales skills assessment, and specifically, what we measure are 21 competencies that are highly correlated to success in selling. And I'm sure we'll go into that a little bit more, so I'll stop there.
Okay. All right. So selling is what's the right way to say it? There's an epidemic in sales underperformance. I think no matter what data you look at or who you talk to, there's something like 40% of reps are consistently missing quota. 40% of deals are ending in no decision. Turnover is high and expensive. Buyers have changed, and sales has gotten harder as a result. But at the same time, companies seem to invest much less in training than they used to. Did you see that during your due diligence when you were thinking about a roll up of sales trainers? Are you seeing that through OMG? Do you have any explanation for why that might be?
Yeah, so I saw some of that. Or rather, what I saw was that investment per capita investment in sales training was not keeping pace with trends in sales hiring. So basically, companies are growing their sales force and they are spending less on training them.
Okay.
Why is that the case? I think there might be a few reasons for it. I think one is, unfortunately, the training industry does not always have the best track record in terms of effective outcomes. And I think part of the reason for that is because many trainers, fortunately not the ones that we work with, but a lot of trainers um, are treating symptoms but they are not getting to the underlying root cause of the issue
Hmm.
with the seller or the sales team.
So in other words,
What do I
people are having a hard time. There's a lot of discounting, so they come in to do negotiation training as opposed to fixing the fundamental problems in the sales process to put them in a position where they need to discount to get the deal. Is that an example?
Exactly right. You've just trained someone who's maybe they're a little bit more of an efficient discounter, but they're still but they're still discounting because you haven't taught them how to sell value.
Right. So one of the things that OMG can absolutely do, if people are skeptical about the value of sales training, OMG can help um, kind of determine the degree of progress with a baseline analysis and then an analysis after some interval, 6 or 12 months, to actually measure the improvement. Right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, and we actually encourage all of our clients to do this: is do your initial baseline analysis, work with the trainer on whatever intervention you need to prioritize the most for your team, and then do a checkpoint, was what we call it. Do a repeat, and where see how much your teams have improved in their selling competencies based on the training that they've been provided.
One of the things that the OMG tools check for is accountability. And I've got a theory that there's a general decline in accountability among entry level folks, mid level folks, and even senior level folks. And I come at it with the perspective of somebody that was in the Army many years ago, and it was kind of hammered into me. And in my early sales jobs with a lot of very structured and rigorous sales training, there was a lot of accountability. I'm wondering whether the decline in sales training may be because of a decline in accountability. And I don't know if you've seen that, if you want to opine on it, or if you want to stay away from that topic. But that's an idea that I've got.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. We haven't, or rather, I haven't looked into the data around accountability trends. So, I'm not able to say definitively. I think it could definitely be a cause for why we're seeing less interest or less investment in sales training.
Okay. One of the things that people use your tools to do is as one of several decision components in deciding whether or not they're going to hire a potential employee. And I heard you speak recently about the obligation that you feel as the CEO to ensure that you're providing accurate data to companies that use the products to contribute to those decisions, but also the important context around how to use it and to what degree it's appropriate to rely on it and how to interpret it, because those decisions impact people's livelihoods.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I think I'll start with the last thing you said, which is we are in the business of helping companies to hire people. We are in the business of helping companies to develop their employees, which means ultimately we are going to be involved in decisions around that impact people's livelihoods, right? Who gets the job, who doesn't get the job, who gets promoted, who doesn't get promoted, who gets what territory, which then, as you and I know, has a lot to determine of whose
Right.
success. Um, and so it's that's something I take really seriously. That's something I take really, really seriously. It's important that we approach our job with a lot of rigor, which I drill into the company. It's one of our values is being highly analytical. But it's also important that we approach it with a lot of humility, right? Because um, one thing I did take from statistics, got that C minus, but one thing I did learn is, it's rare. It's very, very rare, highly improbable that you're going to have a model that's going to be right every single time, right? And the goal is to always refine and improve the model, and you're really only able to do that by taking in information from the real world, quantitative information from the real world, as well as qualitative
Mm-hmm.
feedback from how people are using it. And then it's a judgment call. It's a business decision about how you incorporate that feedback. But that's something that we think is really important for us as model developers. The other thing that we think is very important is kind of incumbent on us is making sure that we are training or educating our clients, our distributors, and our clients about how to properly hire and how to set yourself up for success. We use the phrase, or we talk about, one thing we love it when people rely on the assessment, but we flinch a little bit, or we grimace a little bit when we see people only relying on the assessment, right? It's not magic dust. It's not, hey, the assessment said this, so if I hire them, everything's going to work out great. As you know, the pool the pool of eligible candidates that you're sourcing has a big impact on who you're going to put through the assessment and ultimately who's going to be successful. The rest of your hiring process has a huge impact. If you evaluate somebody and they come back as recommended and you move them forward to the interview stage, but then your interview panel is unprofessional or unstructured or just in whatever way not rigorous, you're probably going to let some lemons, come through there. And then even once you've gotten all that right, onboarding is so, and this is something we've been banging the drum on for years, and we're not alone. ATD, SHRM, a lot of other talent organizations have been as well. Companies just fall down when it comes to onboarding.
Yeah, they do
And
orientation. They get somebody the laptop, the
they do,
business cards, the health insurance form, and they call that onboarding.
yeah, maybe you give them the hoodie with the logo on it or something, but it's like, look, that's not
Right,
onboarding, right? I haven't taught you how to use the technology stack. I haven't set up a regular cadence of, I haven't set expectations for what's expected out of the job. I haven't set up a regular cadence of, developmental meetings with the hiring manager. I haven't provided onboarding training and management
right.
training to the hiring manager so that they know how to have an effective one-on-one. And the list kind of goes on and on. Onboarding should last for at least 90 days. And like you said, in most places, it ends as soon as they give you the laptop and the coffee mug and the
Right.
hoodie. Um, and so that's something that we really try to drill into our clients as well is, hey, there's a great analogy one of our distributors has for it is you can find a rock star. You can find someone who is the best salesperson, is making millions of dollars for their companies. But it's like a preschooler. If I take a 4-year-old, a healthy 4-year-old, and I put them into an environment where they are not nurtured or where everyone else in the preschool is, sick, has the flu, guess what? That 4-year-old, they're gonna catch the flu. Or they're gonna say, I'm not getting
Right.
anything out of this, and they're gonna
Yeah, the
leave.
old you're the product of the
And
5 people you spend the most time with kind of a thing.
absolutely right. Absolutely right. And we see that a lot.
All right, so you talked about the importance because these are impactful decisions, the importance of the accuracy and the meaning of the data. Um, I think what I'm hearing you talk about is essentially you're taking the gut feeling out of it. If we think of a Moneyball example, for instance, Billy Beane said we're going to look at data and we're going to use that to give us a screen to make informed decisions, as opposed to just rubbing our chin, sitting in the stands, using a radar gun, and based on that saying who we think looks good. Is that a fair analogy?
That's a great analogy. Yeah, I think the Moneyball analogy is exactly right. Take the gut feel out of it, or at least minimize the impact of the gut
Right.
feel on the hiring decision.
So the alma mater, the last name, the competitor names that they've worked for over the years, which I think means they're a retread. Some people think it gives them a lot of credibility. Those factors become less important. You've got actual data to look at, and then you interview for cultural fit, and you interview for people. I mean, salespeople. Let's face it, salespeople are the only job you're hiring for that are trained to outwit you. And so the interview needs to be really rigorous. Another aspect of the OMG assessment is the fact that it gives you a roadmap for how to interview in a way that can help to uncover some issues that might be problematic.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's one of the things that we deliver is this roadmap of, hey, here are gaps that we saw in this candidate. So you want to make sure that you're asking them specific questions
Right.
that help you to understand how much of an issue is it actually going to be for that person.
So how do you measure accuracy? You want it to be accurate. It has to be meaningful because these are important decisions. But how do you actually measure accuracy?
Oh man, I could talk about this for someone who doesn't have formal training in statistics. I could talk about this for a while. So this is actually a place where we've made some changes since I came into the company. Historically, the way that we measured accuracy was we would survey users about the outcomes that they were getting, which was pretty good. We would sort of consistently hear back from users that the folks who we recommended disproportionately are the ones who are performing well at the company, and the folks who we did not recommend, sometimes they'd hire them anyway, are the ones who are disproportionately not performing well. And that was pretty consistent. So we do that. We still continue to survey users about that. In our latest survey that we did recently, we found that 72% of the candidates who we recommend and are hired are ranked in the top half of the sales team. And it was actually 100% of the candidates who were not recommended but were hired anyway rank in the bottom half of the sales team. Um, so we still survey users. That's one thing. The other thing that we started to do is we triangulate with other points of performance data that we have. Namely, we collect a lot of performance data on existing sales teams. And as I mentioned, as we talked about earlier, we've got really good data on both who the company says is a performer and who salespeople themselves, they kind of self-report themselves, whether they're a performer or not. And we've actually been able to combine that into a couple of different, like, I'll use some jargon here, combine that into some different meta variables. And then we're able to backtest our candidate assessments on, this pretty large data set, some 12, 15,000 salespeople and their performance data, and see how accurately does the assessment do in identifying who is a performer, who's not. And more importantly, how well do our individual competency scores correlate to whether someone is a performer or someone's not. And we see pretty high correlations there. But then what we can do is we can take that a step further and say, okay, where the correlations aren't as high as we'd like them to be, how do we tweak the questions that we're asking or tweak the way that we're scoring them so that we can improve the predictiveness that we're getting from the assessment.
And I guess the flip side to that, or the corollary to that, is with that cross-referencing of data, then you can also say, hey, look, here's a superstar that it looks like you're going to hire, a second or third standard deviation talent. However, we know from looking at the sales team that your sales managers only coach on pricing and technical details and only coach as required. And we believe that in order for this superstar to really realize their potential, they're going to have to be coached every day with a lot of role playing on tactical sales, strategic sales, outreach, prospecting, networking, presentations, all that kind of stuff. And so you could almost then, with the insight from the sales team evaluation, arm them with the details that they need in aggregate as an organization to help realize the full potential of each individual contributor, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right, right? Because it's not just about, and you make a great point, Ed. It's not just about the individual skills, like where they're strong, where there's gap. It's about the environment that they're going to be going into, and it's about how do their skills sort of fit or not fit with the skills of the person, the broader team, the person who they're going to be reporting to. So we're able to kind of give, pretty precision guided, insights or recommendations around exactly like you just said. Hey, this manager, he's your guy if you want coaching on pricing or negotiation. But if you need more strategic development or if you need more regular touch points, he might not be the right person to pair this, superstar
Right.
talent up with. Or if he is the right person, he's going to need the manager themselves are going to
Right.
need some coaching on how to be a more effective manager.
You mentioned that OMG sells exclusively through Sales Channel. That's a very interesting market approach. I think companies have started to drift away from Sales Channel in my experience. Although now I would say that trend is reversing, and particularly in the SaaS space, there's more and more going back into partnerships and channel. Why is that the model, and are there compromises involved in that, and what are the benefits that are involved in that?
Yeah, I mean, I love channel, and as a distribution model. But and there are a lot of benefits to it. I love our partner network. Our partners are great. I think the kind of a non tangible or non financial benefit of channel is you just get access. You kind of scale your expertise, and you get access to all of these folks that are really really devoted to being experts in their own business, and bringing a slightly different, a slightly called orthogonal lens to talent development and talent assessments, which you can't really replicate if you've got sort of an in-house or a direct sales or a direct marketing model. So big fan of channel from that perspective. Obviously, there are kind of some financial benefits in terms of you don't have to focus as much on managing, hiring, scaling, managing an in-house team. So it can also be a very efficient way to scale as well. And I think going back to the intangible, I think for us, our channel keeps us really honest, in a way that your in-house sales team, if these folks, folks like yourself, they can work with anybody, right? And they can put any assessment they want in their toolkit. They can recommend or not recommend us. And in order for us to be the ones that they say they want to partner with and that they want to show to their clients, we have to bring it. We have to deliver value. And it's a little bit of a different dynamic when it's a W-2
Right.
salesperson.
You're a first-time CEO. You're 18 months now, or something like that.
Yeah, about
20
20
months
months
in.
in. Yeah.
Biggest lesson you've learned?
Ooh, man, that's a great question. Biggest lesson I've learned: how much I still have to learn. I think how much I still have to learn, and there's a I'm gonna botch this phrase. So if you've heard it, Ed, tell me, and you can help me out with it. It's essentially we overestimate how much we can get done in a year, but we underestimate how much we can get done in 5 years.
I think Bill Gates said that about the degree of technology change.
Thank you. Yeah, that rings a bell. And I think it applies to just sort of it applies to anyone who is in a leadership seat and trying to kind of move people toward new product development, new market entry, or whatever
Hmm.
else. I find that in a given day or week or whatever, I get frustrated because we're not hitting our rocks. We're an EOS company. We're not hitting our rocks. Things are piling up on the issues list, and then I get to the end of the year and I look back at everything that we've accomplished. I'm like, wow, I don't even recognize where we are compared to where we were
Right.
12 months ago. So I try to keep that in mind in my moments of frustration.
But in those moments, you're under a lot of stress from yourself, from investors, from your vision for the future. How do you manage that stress?
Um, yeah, I mean, it can be stressful. Just trying to maintain balance helps, right? I mean, this is a really important part of my life, but I'm lucky that it's not the kind of only focus in my life, and I try not to make it the most important part of my life. And I think I'm successful. Most days and most weeks. I've got my own family. I was married not too long ago, so I have my own family, and that ends up taking up a lot of time. Obviously, trying to spend time, nurture my relationships with my family and my friends. That's something I try to be very intentional about giving time to. I'm sure you've heard the juggling ball analogy of the work is the rubber ball if you drop it, but your personal relationships are the glass ball, and when they
Actually,
break.
I've never heard that before. I like that.
Yeah. So I try to kind of keep that front and center, and then I also try to I think one of the you only ask for one lesson, but I'll give you another one. You know, Something I'm kind of learning or becoming more sensitive to in a leadership position is the people who you work with, not just the people who work for me, but just people who I work with, kind of become like pretty highly attuned to your my own energy level and like my
Hmm.
mood. Um, and so that puts an obligation on me to kind of take care of myself, because if I'm having a bad day or a bad week and I show up in the office that way, or I show up on a call with my partners that way or whatever, they're going to feel it.
Right.
And it might not impact the bottom line or anything, but it's going to have ripple effects into kind of how they sort of show up in their work. And that's not something that I want to be a motivator for. So try to take care of myself. Try to get some exercise when I can, and do whatever else I can to make sure I'm keeping my own energy level good.
And in your personal time, are you steering clear of data, or are you all about data too? There, are you filling in the box scores on the sports games, or what?
I try not to. The one place where I really can't resist is so I am a huge sports fan. I could use data to help me pick better sports teams, because somehow I ended up being a Knicks fan, a Tottenham Hotspurs fan, and it's just all bad. So there's a kind of a you alluded to Moneyball. There's a huge wave of introducing analytics and advanced statistics into all sports. And
Particularly
I
with all the gambling stuff now on top of it.
yeah, the gambling stuff is a big piece of it, but I'm actually just interested in how it changes the X's and O's. So basketball, one sport that I follow, um, 10 or so years ago, your kind of model, maybe 15 years ago, your model basketball player was Kobe Bryant, who was a shooting guard who would keep the ball, dribble a bunch, and then he would be guarded by three or four people, and he would shoot like a mid-range jump shot. And then some statistics nerds like myself came around, and they started running the numbers, and they were like, "Hey, Kobe, that's actually a really really inefficient shot. You have the it's a you get 2 points, but you have the lowest probability of getting those 2 points. If you're only going to play for 2 points, it's a much higher probability for you to go directly to the rim and try to get a closer shot, or play for 3 points and shoot three pointers." And that's kind of led to this revolution in the NBA Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, even LeBron James, who historically was kind of not this type of player. Now they just like stand outside the 3 point line and shoot threes all day.
Hmm.
And as you're watching a basketball game, you can kind of see the smarter players. Where the Celtics are in the finals right now. You can see the smarter players, the Luka Doncic, the Jason Tatum's, sort of very carefully playing their spots and making sure that they get to the highest percentage spots on the court. So it's pretty cool to see these guys who I'm sure did not expect to have their basketball career sort of dovetail with them being statistics nerds and analysts. Also, kind of becoming, it's everywhere. All of us are becoming data geeks.
But I love that analogy to sales because for so long, companies have really brought data and rigor to a lot of the back end efforts or operations of the business. And sales and marketing to a large degree have just been run on gut feeling. And the argument has been, well, people and prospects are different in the factory. We can set up jigs, we can set up fixtures, we can control people's schedule, give them better lighting, climate control, whatever we need to do. But sales is in the jungle, and there's no way to control that. But sports is as unpredictable as anything could be. And if you can use data to improve the performance there, I think that's a great argument for why you can do the same in sales.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And we see that, companies are now one of the kind of big growth areas I'm seeing is commercial operations or rev ops companies. It used to be sort of like a Fortune 500 or venture backed tech thing. And
Right,
now you're seeing it creeping well down into mid market where
right,
sitting right next to the CEO and the CRO or the VP of sales there's the VP, it's a VP or higher level position, RevOps,
right.
who's trying to do exactly that, saying, hey, how can we get to the the highest probability success opportunities and create the highest probability success team. So it's encouraging to see it. I wish it were happening faster, but like I said, short term progress is slow, but then long term progress kind of seems to happen all at once. So we'll get there.
I'm always interested talking with somebody as accomplished with you as you with a CV like yours and who's done the things that you've done. What's one thing that you've put a lot of effort into getting better at that you enjoy, but you just aren't really that good at?
Oh man, I will run in my spare time, for exercise and it's something I started doing it because I used to box, so running was part of your road
Right.
training. And then I just decided to do the running because I heard that it's a sport, one of the few sports where as you get older, you actually improve. And you see, generally speaking, if you're a consistent runner as you get older, you start to see your times come down. That has not been the case for me, Ed. I am running and I'm running and I'm running, and the 5Ks just get longer and the 10Ks just get longer. So I'm not, if anyone out there has some tips for me on how to bring my times down, I'm all for it because it's not working for me.
I'd say just switch to a bicycle.
Yeah, maybe.
Biking for me, my running days are long over. I used to run a lot when I was in the army. But for me, getting on a bicycle, and I don't ride on the road anymore after I got hit a couple of years ago, but I've got a
Oof.
trainer in the garage and I can listen to podcasts. I use Zwift, so it's gamified cycling with integrated resistance. And so it's very similar to a ride on the road, although around where I am, well, where you are up in New England, is relatively flat. And so I actually get a lot more elevation using Zwift
Oh
than I
wow.
did just riding on the road. But that's my solution. And I see my performance way up and way down. I mean, there's times that I can be. I think this morning I was 30% off some of my personal bests on some of the segments during my ride today, and I just felt like crap. But other days it just clicks.
Good. Well, I might come to you for some recommendations then, because I could use that.
One more kind of personal question: the workflows are always interesting to me. How people optimize for their efficiency. How do you what's your major planning unit? Is it a day? Is it a week? Do you work at home or do you only work in the office? Do you start early? Do you work late? How have you found you can optimize for your effectiveness?
Yeah, it's something I'm still learning. So if you got tips, send them my way. I would encourage other folks, please send me tips. I'm always looking to learn. Again, I kind of try to solve for when do I have the most energy, and energy to do particular tasks is what I've learned about myself. So, I am a, I'm a, I wouldn't say I'm a super early riser, but I'm up, around like six or so. And for me, it's part of kind of my routine of taking care of myself. Getting into the gym in the morning is a big thing. So making sure I get into the gym. If it's a run day, making sure I get out for my run. Um, and then when I from there, I pretty much jump right into work. And what I've started to do is actually I just block my calendar in the morning because there's a period of time, usually from right when I've had my first coffee until maybe 2.5, 3 hours, where I am really, really good at desk work. So anything where I need to do deep thinking or writing strategic work, or if I got to email some key clients or whatever, that's when I want to get that work done. And then I find that I actually have a lot more energy for external work, whether that's talking to clients or my board or investors or whoever else, or the team, the staff. I try to reserve that for the afternoon because that's when I find I have the most energy for that. Um, and then I also find that for some reason I'm a little bit of like a night owl, or I get a little bit of a burst like into the evenings. So usually I'll try to make sure I carve out some time to spend with the family, when it's a reasonable time around dinner or whatever else. And then I usually have a little bit of time, a little bit of gas left in the tank to go back to any desk work or deep thinking work I need to do late at night.
And
Um,
has that been static or has that evolved? Have your periods of energy fallen at different times of the day, or is that pretty much the way Ben is?
No, that's it's changed. It's changed over time. When I started my career and I was in sales and trading, I'd have to be up and at my desk by around like 5:30. So
Mhm.
that kind of totally shifted where my energy was. But yeah, it's changed over time. So I just sort of try to be responsive to that.
For a long time in hiring salespeople, we've emphasized the importance of tenure, that short tenures were likely indicative of what would be a short tenure with the company they go to work for. And I'm willing to give people a mulligan for some of the COVID stuff. I think there was a lot of changes during COVID that weren't necessarily because of a habit. But one of the things that I wonder about is whether with rising generations, I mean, I look at your professional experience. There was a lot of jobs you had a couple of years, and I wonder if we need to think about changing our focus on longevity and sales roles. Do you have a sense about that?
Yeah, I think that I'm inclined to agree with you and go where you are, right? If you look at the data, what we so first of all, there's a demographic shift, right? The baby boomer generation is no longer the largest proportion of the workforce, and it's now millennials, and will soon be Gen Z entering the workforce. That'll make up most of the workforce.
Don't
That
forget
dem-
us Gen Xers.
and of course the Gen Xers are still there, right? But the Gen X, for I don't know
Everyone
what
forgets Gen X. We just kind of we fade into the background.
I don't know what happened there, but Gen X was. I mean, you guys invented the internet, so that's you guys. That's a big one. But for whatever reason, Gen X was like just not quite as big from a demographic standpoint as the previous ones. Um, but what we see along with the demographic shift from boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, that demographic shift was accelerated by COVID, right? So if you think about the sort of overall labor force trends in COVID, we see, first of all, we just saw a lot of people leave the labor force
Right.
around 2020, 21, either voluntarily or involuntarily. And then things kind of, I wouldn't say get back to normal, but things sort of snap back. And we see a lot of people come back into the labor force, right? I don't have the exact numbers, but let's just use round numbers. Let's say 10 million people left the labor force, 10 million people came back to the labor force. So from a macro perspective, if you're an economist, you're, okay, great. The labor force is balanced. When you double click into that trend, and I am getting around to answering your question about longevity. When you double click into that trend, what you see is the composition of people who left, the 10 million who left, are not the same as the 10 people who entered, right? So disproportionately, the ones who left and stayed out of the labor force were boomers and older Gen X, and the ones who entered or came back to the labor force were millennials and Gen Z. So why am I talking about this in terms of longevity? When I'm looking at my hiring pool at all levels, whether that's a individual contributor or that's a manager or a manager of managers, the people who I have to select from are more likely to be the younger, newer generation than they were a couple of years ago.
Hmm.
There are a couple of traits of that generation to be aware of. One is, yes, you do see kind of more frequent job hopping. I believe boomers would stay in a job on average around 10 years, and millennials, Gen Z, I think it's like 2 to 3 years is like the average tenure that you see. So they are more likely to have had a couple of different jobs. What that also means is when you're considering someone for a management or a leadership role, is they are less likely to have been in kind of an existing leadership role for a given period of time,
Right.
right? So overall, yeah, we are seeing a lot more churn in the labor force, and I do think we kind of need to. I don't necessarily want to totally discount longevity because I think in sales especially it matters, and we probably don't give enough credence.
If you get a
Um,
12-month sales cycle and somebody changes jobs every 2 years, I mean, that's
what have
not
you
a profitable
what
model.
have you done? Yeah, I mean, what do you even have to talk about there, right? It's like
Right.
I filled up the pipeline and then I left. Like, come
Right.
on. But yeah, at the same time, the reality is we are, at least just from a demographic perspective, we are. It seems like we're entering an era where we're going to have kind of higher churn, and we probably need to calibrate both our expectations around hiring, but also calibrate sort of how we onboard and develop people to make
Right.
sure that we take account for that, which goes back to the onboarding discussion we had.
But all the more important, of course, to have data so that you know that the ramp up time is going to be fast, so that if the typical tenure becomes 2 to 3 years, that you're not waiting 18 months or 24 months to realize if it's working, but you know after 3 or 4 months if it's working, you're managing well, you're coaching well, and you've got a good sense. First of all, because of the data, you're hiring better, but you also understand because you're tracking metrics, you're making decisions quickly. A lot of people say hire slowly, fire quickly, and that sounds harsh, but I heard Slootman talking about it in a discussion the other day, and that I think if you look at high performing leaders, they make those kinds of decisions quickly, make them well, make them informed, but they make them quickly.
Absolutely, absolutely. And look, there is you hit the nail on the head. You make them well, you make them informed, you make them quickly. Don't underestimate the cultural impact, right?
Sure.
When you have somebody who is not performing or is not at the bar that your organization has set, and you let them go, you are sending a message to the rest of the organization that is at or above the bar that you value their work,
Right.
and that's a message that you want to build into your culture. I can't take credit for that. That's something I heard from an OMG partner, and it really stuck with me. So I'm just amplifying it.
But back to sports, you see that with Belichick. I mean, I think he was the ideal coach for a different era, and there's other coaches that have a similar sort of a philosophy, but high expectations engender high performance, in my experience.
Absolutely right. Yeah, you see it with a lot of the top performing coaches, and it's funny because it spans across coaching styles, right? Belichick in football, Pep Guardiola in the other football, soccer at Manchester City. Phil Jackson, kind of had a reputation as being this sort of groovy hippie, touchy feely type of coach, but he would set incredibly high expectations, and if you didn't meet them, guess what? You weren't
Right.
even on the team anymore. So
Right. You mentioned the horizontality, if that's a word, of your product. Obviously, different companies have very different market situations. There could be one call or fairly simple B2B transactions. There's very complex multi-million, multi-year sell cycles with large buying teams and enterprise sales. There's different market attributes. Just talk quickly about how you account for that in the tools.
yeah, so what we do is we ask. I mean, there are a couple of ways we account for it, but the kind of most obvious one is we just ask the client to calibrate their selling role or their selling profile based on their selling environment. So exactly like you just mentioned, if you are doing a complex, multi-month, multi-year enterprise sale, we'll ask you to indicate that in the assessment. And then when we're evaluating candidates for you or when we're evaluating your existing sales team, we'll highlight where there's compatibility between a seller and the selling environment that you have and where there's also incompatibility. The other
So
way that, yeah, go ahead.
you evaluate differently based on the kind of the reality of the market and the job.
It, yeah, exactly right. And then the other thing that we do is, there's a component of the assessment that measures your sales specific beliefs. And one of the things we'll also do is, we'll point out a little bit more qualitatively, but we'll also point out, hey, this person's beliefs are mean that they are really going to struggle with a high velocity sales cycle, or they're really going to
Right.
struggle with a deeply consultative sale.
We sat in the same meeting recently and listened to somebody go through a really interesting example of what I would call kind of a serial Pareto analysis. If you look at the 80-20 rule, they kind of did 80-20 and then 80-20 on the next 80 and then 80-20 on the next 80. And statistically, what he had found was that I think the numbers were 36% of the team delivers 90% of the sales results
Yeah.
almost across the board. So if you look at the sales component of your SGA expense and you realize that 64% of that only correlates to 10% of revenue, it starts to open one's eyes to the enormous opportunity cost and the enormous direct cost of underperforming sales teams. There's a similar kind of a thing in hiring. I often say that if you got a 12-month sales cycle, $100,000 base for a salesperson, and you realize you make a mistake, it's probably going to cost you $500,000 by the time you figure recruiters, onboarding, ramp up time, the empty territory, your management time, all that kind of stuff. I've seen some people say it's more than $1 million. But why do you think companies struggle to actually put their finger on or acknowledge to themselves, be honest about these enormous costs of sales hiring mistakes?
um, yeah, I think there are two reasons. I think the first is they don't sit down and measure it, and part of that's not, it's not out of negligence. It's because in a lot of companies, especially once you kind of creep up into the, even the lower mid market, the hiring decision becomes federated, right? So there's a VP of sales or some kind of sales leader who says, I need to make this hire. And then the responsibility for actually sourcing and finding that hire and maybe even onboarding and training is going to go into the head of HR, the head of recruiting. Um, and then
Who doesn't have skin in the game?
who doesn't have skin in the game. And then maybe the training and onboarding is going to go into sales enablement. Maybe it comes back to like the VP of sales. But for the most part, there's this disconnect, right? So the feedback loop kind of breaks down. So I think that's a piece of it. I think there's also, don't underestimate the human element of folks do not like to be confronted, especially kind of type A driven folks who are in executive seats. They don't like to be confronted by their mistakes. And I think, hiring misfires, we all have them. We all will have them. But no one likes to be confronted by them. So I think there's also just a little bit of let's just sweep it under the rug and pretend it's not happening.
Speaking of hiring, you recently hired, I think, the first partner sales manager for OMG. So you hired a salesperson to sell to salespeople and sales trainers sales related products. It must have felt like being in a hall of mirrors. Was there anything that did you have any epiphanies from going through that process of what your clients actually go through?
In terms of hiring, sourcing candidates.
Hiring a salesperson.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think one of the kind of the big aha moment for us was, and it's almost obvious in retrospect, but the pool where you are going to source your candidates matters a lot. That is going to drive 80% of your success, 80% of your outcomes, and it's one that I see clients overlook a lot because we all go to sort of the same job boards, the same sources. I'm going to look at LinkedIn, Indeed, or whatever else my industry specific job board is. Um, but that's where everybody is, right? So you're just getting like this sort of very generic pool that you're kind of scooping out of, and you're not really giving yourself like a high likelihood or high chance of success. And we found that, right? We went into those job boards and we posted. It wasn't really working for us. We also posted in kind of a very generic ad, and Dave, God bless him. I went to him and I said, "Hey, Dave, this is not working." He said, "Let me see the job ad." And he takes a look at the job ad and he rewrites the job ad in a very kind of Dave style,
Right.
um, and immediately, hey, guess what? We're no longer kind of scooping out of the generic pool. We're over here in the section for people who want to sell to sales trainers and sales consultants and specifically
Right.
sell them sales products. And immediately the quality went up. So that was kind of very eye opening of how effective that can be.
We're having a session next week. It'll be published by the time this podcast drops, but we're speaking for private equity firms about how the sponsors and portfolio companies can use these tools to measure and improve what we're calling quality of sales. In other words, better due diligence, helping understand root causes of underperforming portfolio companies, et cetera. I'll drop a link to that session below this podcast in the notes. But what are other interesting applications that you're seeing or you're considering for the future that you think the tools may be underutilized?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say too much. One of the things that we are working on, and we shared it, where we just were at the recent meeting, is building more analytics into the tools in terms of showing folks where there are correlations between competencies, right? Because sales skills are not developed and also are not deficient in isolation, right? Like we talked about earlier, if someone struggles with selling value, um, there's probably something else that's going on in something that's not related to selling value, but is correlated to it. And we have the data on that. We've sort of built that out, and we're going to be exposing it in our assessments so that you can see this person struggles to sell value because they struggle with confronting people who they have to develop a relationship with. So if you want to help them become better value sellers and not just treat the symptom, you also have to help them really get over their need for approval while still, helping them to foster relationships, but have kind of the appropriate level of relationships.
So almost
Um,
coaching tips.
yeah, yeah. In some ways, coaching tips. I would say just sort of like quick guides for where do you look. So yeah, we're really excited to share that with our distributors and to bring that out to the market.
You're a lifelong learner, I can tell listening to you. What business related books or blogs or podcasts or YouTube channels do you go to when you're out for those morning runs or when you've got time commuting or whatever? What do you find thought provoking?
Man, right now I am trying to get my way through as many. I'm actually pulling up my ebook library now. I'm trying to get my through as many sort of sales development books as possible. One, to pick up more tips to help us as a company, but also to really kind of better understand how our distributors think and how our distributors work, and also what it is that some of our clients are exposed to as well. So yeah, I'm reading. I've been reading the Challenger Sales Spin. I've been reading the Sales Development Playbook on outbound and kind of BDR motion. I just started Predictable Revenue right now as well. So yeah, just as many sales books as I can. If you have recommendations, please send them my way.
But all reading, no audiobooks?
Those are all on audiobook
Got it.
because I find that I don't have as much time to just sit and thumb through a book as I
Right.
would like. So it's usually on my commute.
Check out Jolt Effect. That's written by the same folks as the Challenger Sale.
Okay.
It's really interesting. It highlights the fact if 40% of deals are ending in no decision, why is that the case? And it's, certainly there's some lack of qualification and deals get into the pipeline that shouldn't be there. But often what happens is buyers get excited based on the FOMO, the fear of missing out. The salespeople develop pain. The buyer says, "Yeah, I got to fix this." But then there's a Rubicon that the buyer crosses where the impact of the FOMO drops off and they start to worry about the FOFU
Mm.
or FOMU would be the, I guess, the PG way to say it, the fear of messing up. And so at that point, then the sales rep play typically is to go back and keep hammering on the FOMO. You're going to lose this opportunity. You're going to miss out on these gains. And all that does is actually drives away the buyer who's starting to say to themselves, but what if I make a mistake? What if people on my team object to it? What if the implementation doesn't go well? What if we don't get the results that we're expecting? So I think the Jolt effect does a really good job codifying that transition that happens in the sales process and why the traditional playbook to counter it is actually counterproductive.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. I'll check it out. I made a note.
Looking out over the next 5 years, you obviously come with a lot of management and financial acumen. What do you see as biggest threats and biggest opportunities for businesses in general?
I mean, I think everyone is hard to go on a podcast these days and not talk about AI, artificial intelligence. Um, I I do think it's going to be a tremendous opportunity in terms of helping companies to work more efficiently. And we are already seeing that. We do not use AI in our product development at all, but we do use it in kind of our marketing, and it's made our marketing team much more efficient just in terms of building content. Um, but I also think that that's going to be it's going to create a challenge for the selling community because the bar, and again, you're already seeing this, the bar to show that you know your prospect and that you understand your prospect is just going to go like this.
Right.
And it's a place where honestly I'm a little concerned about. And it's something I'm thinking about. How can we build into the assessment to help evaluate salespeople on this? Because I don't know about you, but I get about 300 cold emails a day, and they are almost all written in. They're bad. I'll
Right.
just be succinct. They're bad. Um, And I do worry about all these folks that are in a seat where it's like, listen, ChatGPT could have spat out something that was better and much more highly personalized. So why are you getting paid whatever you're getting paid to send me something that's really, really, not appropriate? And for anyone who is already kind of engaging that motion in a way that is appropriate, well, still, ChatGPT can send me something that is much more engaging and much more highly personalized. So what what extra are you going to show, or what extra are you going to tell me that is going to make you stand out from your competitors who are just using a bot to get in front of me?
And I'll preach here for a minute. The extra better not be technical features of your product. The extra has to be business acumen. That's the only thing that matters. The way you can help buyers achieve their aspirations and their business goals. And if you're not talking about that, you're just wasting air.
Amen to that. Amen to that.
All right, so shameless plug. I am an OMG partner. It's an important part of my business, a part I'm intent on growing, and I'm excited about a lot of the changes that you're bringing to the company. So anyone listening interested in Salesforce sales team evaluations, sales candidate assessments, I'd love to chat with you, but also feel free to reach out to Ben. People that want to connect with you, learn from you, follow you, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Ben Tagoe, or just shoot me an email, ben@objectivemanagement.com.
Cool. All right, so we've run a little bit over time. I appreciate your patience and the insights. Wrap it up for us. Take us home. 3 minutes on data, sales, testing tools, however you want to kind of put a bow around this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about data, and anyone who's spent the time with us, I think, knows that I'm a believer in data, in making management decisions and making better hiring decisions. But one of the things I kind of want to stress, and I talk about this with my team as well, and with our partners, is um, at the end of the day, you're telling data. The data is there in service of a story, right? And you know, you have to make sure that you're telling a story that is coherent and that is compelling, both to your internal stakeholders, if you're one of our clients, or as a partner, if you're selling to a client, that you're using data to tell a compelling story, right? So um, I always say that the data is incredibly important in the decision making, whether that's a hiring decision or the development or the talent decision, but it's not sufficient, right? What is really required is, how do we take that data and how do we package it into a story that resonates, and ultimately kind of moves people, to make a better management decision, more than just sort of in a kind of dry and dispassionate way.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ben. Each time we chat, I get to know you better, and I enjoy it, and I look forward to a long and mutually beneficial business collaboration. Thanks for your time today. Thanks for sharing your insights, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you.
And for everyone listening, I know that you know someone that is responsible for salespeople and wishes their business was selling more. So you got to share this. Please make sure you hit the bell, subscribe, like it, share it, comment on it, and pass it out to folks who you think will get value from it. Thanks very much for listening.